Hello everybody and welcome to tonight's very special episode of Monash Q&A, where we'll be delving into the economic affairs and attractiveness of Singapore for international investment opportunities. Singapore is the only island city country in the world and is a relatively small landmass located in the southeast of Asia. It has a population of over 5.6 million people, 39% of whom are foreign nationals. Despite its comparatively small population, the country has been given the nickname Asian Tiger, since it has had such strong economic growth in recent years. It has been ranked as having the most open economy in the world and has a highly developed free market system. Singapore went from a third world country to a first world country in the span of just 50 years. I'm delighted to introduce one of the most knowledgeable and expert panels we have ever had on Monash Q&A. These four women are well known as some of the brightest young minds in Monash's international business stream and are experts in the international affairs of Singapore. Please welcome Amy, Elizabeth, Ivana and Nadini. They are Andy's researchers. As per usual, we've had a variety of questions submitted by audience members and viewers all across Monash. So without further ado, let's begin. So first, Amy, are you able to give us a little bit of an introduction and tell the audience what globalization actually is?
Yeah, sure. So basically, it's a concept commonly understood as the rapid acceleration of cross-border flows, especially capital, goods, services, people, and ideas. So it enables nations to come together and support each other.
Great. So how has Singapore fared in the process of globalization?
So Singapore has definitely changed the process of globalization, and I'll be discussing this in four aspects today. Firstly, jobs. So globalization has upped Singapore's work culture, as it was reported in 2016 it had clocked on the most hours of work in the world. Singapore's larger corporations demand long productive hours, meaning productivity has definitely benefited from the pushes of competition of corporations across the globe via globalization. So in terms of the natural environment, Singapore lacks natural endowments and resources as it's such a small nation. Agriculture is limited, it only makes up 0.8% of the available land. So if anything, globalization has allowed Singapore to overcome its lack of natural resources in order to increase economic growth by allowing interaction with other nations that are rich in endowments they otherwise wouldn't have access to. So moving on to diversity, Singapore is certainly not a melting pot of individuals like Australia, as it takes its traditions and customs into high regards. Singapore fosters skilled migrants that encourage economic growth. Thus, globalisation has allowed the nation to utilise talents of others, in which the divide into residents, which are permanent, and non-residents, which are temporary. In 2010, statistics showed 25.7% of the total population came from non-residents. Typically either being students or workers, and accounted for a fifth of Singapore's total population. So in regards to the last aspect of inequality and poverty, Singapore's inequality has slowly but surely declined over the past few years. Its Gini coefficient has declined from 0.47 in 2006 to 0.458 in 2016. The Gini coefficient is an economic ratio that measures the spread of wealth among a nation's citizens. So Singapore's index demonstrates a minor change.
Right. So would you say that globalization for Singapore has been good or bad?
Yeah, so overall Singapore has utilised the globalisation movement to the best of its ability, allowing the country to boom in terms of economic growth. So globalisation has created more jobs, especially through the skilled non-residents, and opened up its borders to diversity, and just generally enjoying all the benefits that an open economy reaps. So in terms of your question, yes, it is a winner.
Right, thank you. Now, Ivana, I'm sure many of the members of the audience have actually seen the movie Crazy Rich Asians, where Singapore is portrayed as a very developed and wealthy nation with a lot of very rich people. Are you able to tell me if this portrayal is true? How does their economy and development as a nation compare to the rest of the world?
Yeah, so Singapore truly does live up to the movie. It's one of the most technology-ready nations, according to the WEF. It's the best investment potential. It also scores really high on the corruption index, so scoring 85 out of 100, so it's ranked third out of 180 countries in the world. It's also the third largest foreign exchange market, the largest financial centre, the largest oil refining and trading centre, and the second busiest container port. It's also one of the most expensive cities to live in, according to The Economist, reported in 2013. Also, I would like to examine Singapore's economy. So Singapore has a highly developed and successful free market economy. It's the second freest economy in the world, according to the 2015 Index of Economic Freedom. It enjoys an open and corruption-free environment, as mentioned before, and also stable prices and a per capita GDP higher than most of that of developing countries. Their GDP per capita for 2017 was $94,100, which has been increasing steadily over the years, as well as their GDP, which has been increased from 2016 to 2017 of a rate of 3.6%. The economy depends heavily on exports, particularly of electronics, petroleum products, chemicals, medical and optical devices, pharmaceuticals, and on Singapore's vibrant transportation, the business sector, and also the financial service sector. Singapore over the years has attracted major investments in advanced manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, and medical technology production, and will continue efforts to strengthen its position as a Southern Asian leading financial and technological hub. So overall, its economy has been on the rise and developing. They're also a major exporter, and it's one of their main incomes of finance. So in 2017, their exports earned close to $400 billion. Their major exporting partners are China, Hong Kong, Malaysia, the US, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, and Thailand. Also, I would like to make a comment about their Human Development Index. So currently, Singapore index is 0.932, which is a very high. But after the inequality adjusted, it comes down to 0.816. So we can see that due to the high income inequality that occurs within the country, it significantly impacts the Human Development Index. However, overall they rank 9th in the world, and their life expectancy of birth is 83.2 years, and expected years of schooling is 16.2, which are all very high statistics for a country that has progressed from a first world to a third world.
So, what does all this mean for an Australian firm looking to expand into Singapore?
So for an Australian firm should look at both measures that I just commented on, so both economic and human development if they're looking to invest into Singapore. Singapore is a country that relies on foreign investors and an influx of foreign capital to maintain that current economic growth that they started. And both measures show us that Singapore is a highly developed country, and overall Singapore is worth investing into. Also, to make an example of that, I would like to comment on the Jurong Islands. So investors and people who actually live in Singapore took an opportunity to make an artificial island, and at the moment it is the chemical hub in the world for petrochemical industry, and they managed in a short period of time to actually get 60 companies investing in them and a combined budget of $22 billion.
So what kind of companies are in there? Companies like BP, or are they?
So we're looking at mostly petrochemical industry, so BP, Singapore Petroleum Company, Singapore Refinery, the ExxonMobil, and the car companies. Yeah.
Cool. Nadine, when comparing the people of Singapore and Australia, how dissimilar or similar are they?
Great question, James. So when we were looking into similarities between Australia and Singapore, we did take into account three different types of studies. To start off with, we looked at the cultural elements, which consisted of languages, so what different types of languages are spoken in the country, the religions, We looked at the level of education which each individual obtained, the social structure and the political philosophy, also the economic philosophy. Now, to move on to look into each element individually, we can start off with languages. As you can see on some of the facts we've found, English is the largest widely spoken language in both countries, so that is quite a large similarity between both the countries. Each country, and also the second one, which is Mandarin, 2.5% in Australia, it is quite low compared to Singapore, which is 34.9%. Now, moving on to the religion aspect of both of the countries, they do share similarities, however, they do also both have quite big differences in which the first ones are. The third element which we looked into quite significantly was education. As you can see, Australia is 23 years and 16 years for Singapore, and the type of measurement we looked in was for school life expectancy, so the number of years a person would in general go to school. Singapore is starting to build up on their education as they believe the best form to get into a better position when it comes to a job or anything in life is to receive better education. Now, the fourth element which we looked into was social structure. As you can see, both countries do have different types of measurements when it comes to social structure. Australia looks into more of the working element, so it's categorised by upper class, middle class and lower class, whereas Singapore is categorised depending on their ethnicity. So Singapore is categorised depending on whereabouts and what nationality you're from. The fifth element which we looked into was political philosophy. Both countries do have the same legal structure, which is common law. Looking at Australia, they do have their government type considered as parliamentary democracy, whereas Singapore is parliamentary republic. Now, if we move on to economic philosophy, as Ivana did mention, we did look into some more of those facts. Australia, as Ivana mentioned, was natural resources. The exports were natural resources, energy and food, whereas for Singapore, it was considered electronics, petroleum products, chemicals, medical and optical devices, and pharmaceuticals. The unemployment rate is 2.2 for Singapore, whereas for Australia it is at 5.6. If you look at Australia, the minimum restrictions on imports are for imports of goods and services, whereas Singapore is considered as a highly developed country. And then if we move on for the GDP, which is PPP, it's at 1.248 trillion for Australia, and then the GDP for PPP is at 528.1 billion for Singapore. Now, we did further look into two types of theories. The first one is Hofstede's cultural dimensions, and the second one was Ronin's and Schenker's cultural clusters. Now, to start off with the Hofstede's cultural dimensions, it was a theory which was established in the late 60s by Gerd Hofstede, who constructed his research to a collection of 116,000 people through 50 different countries. Looking at the diagram that we have here, there is quite a big significant difference between the countries. However, we can see that they could be easily overcome from the factors that we have found before. Now, moving on to the second theory, which is the Ronin Schenker's cultural clusters. This was a research that was conducted by looking at the cultural similarities and how people's work attitudes can be different and dependent on where they come from in the country. They were clustered into categorized into 8 clusters of studies. Australia fits into the cluster of Anglo, whereas Singapore fits into the cluster of Far Eastern. By research conducted, it can be established that the general sense that the closer the countries are, the easier it is for them to work together. However, looking, as I did mention before, from the 8 different cultural elements we did discuss, there are quite similar factors that can be overcome.
Elizabeth, can you tell me what Singapore specialises in or should specialise in on a more global scale? Essentially, how should they be looking to trade with other countries?
Great question. There are trade theories such as David Ricardo's comparative advantage theory, which states that countries should specialise in the production of goods that they produce most efficiently and buy goods that they produce less efficiently from other countries. Based on this line of thinking, Singapore should specialise in the production of refining chemicals as well as manufacturing technology such as integrated circuits. Singapore's geographical location includes access to deep water ports and close proximity to major shipping routes, which assisted the country's economic growth greatly. This, alongside the demand for a variety of chemicals driven by the Asian region's rapid population growth, has cultivated a successful environment for the chemical industry to boom. Many multinational corporations were drawn to Singapore, as mentioned by Ivana, to set up shop during the 1960s, and with appealing tax laws set by the Singapore government, since the 1970s the country has been one of the largest refinery centres in the world. Hence, Singapore is considered to have a comparative advantage in producing high value-added products from refined chemicals, in particular petroleum. Furthermore, integrated circuits are the third most traded product and Singapore's greatest export. Thus, there is high demand for this product, particularly from Asian countries such as China, and taking into consideration Singapore's access to deep water ports, which would enable easy transportation to other regions of Asia, the country should seek to specialise in this industry in addition to the petrochemical industry.
So, what do you think about Australia? Should we as a country be looking to specialise in something similar or different when trading globally?
So conversely, Australia should look to specialise in trading our national resources. Australia is home to an abundance of natural resources with large reserves of products such as coal, iron ore, petroleum and many more. Thus, this is an industry that Australia should seek to specialise in, as it has a competitive advantage over many countries such as Singapore who lack such natural resources. An example of Australia already capitalising on this advantage is the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, whereby Australia is exporting products such as iron ore, gold, crude petroleum and liquefied natural gas. As a result, China has now become our largest trading partner, and in 2017 alone we exported $85 billion worth of resources and energy. Therefore, as we have large quantities of natural resources and China lacks but critically requires such products in order to continue their booming growth and development, this trade agreement supports the basis of theories such as David Ricardo's. In addition, Australia's agricultural sector, in particular its cattle industry, is another area of specialisation that Australia should seek to trade internationally. Australia's vast land, in comparison to many other countries, provides a competitive advantage in our agricultural industry. The demand for quality Australian beef is high from countries across the globe, such as China, Indonesia and the US. Hence, in 2016, we were the world's third largest beef exporter. As a result of the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, Australia now benefits from tariff-free exporting to China, which is one of the world's biggest consumers as its domestic production is limited. Thus, Australia's trade specialisation and its competitive advantage lies more within its natural resources and agriculture, whereas Singapore's revolves around its manufacturing of refined chemicals and technology.
Great. So, guys, we're actually running out of time. So, just to conclude and sum everything up that we've been talking about, I want to get a little snippet from each of you talking about whether you believe an Australian firm should be looking to invest or establish operations in Singapore. Just really quickly.
Definitely, James. So as I did discuss cultures, even though there are some differences between them, they're easily overcomable. Definitely should invest into Singapore.
Yes, I agree with Nadine. Australian firms should definitely invest into Singapore as it has a highly developed financial and economic system, and it's a country that welcomes investments.
Exactly. As Ivana said, I agree. Singapore is ranked second for the World Bank's measures of ease of doing business, thus its business-friendly environment would appeal to Australian industries.
Just adding on, Australian firms just starting up would be entitled to a zero tax exemption on $74,000 of income for the next 3 consecutive years, so of course, why wouldn't you?
Unfortunately, that is all we have time for. Thank you very much for watching. A huge thank you to Andy's researchers. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.